Hello everyone, in today's video we're going to be taking a look at flying the Diamond DA40 Turbo Diesel Fuel-Injected TDI. This is definitely a unique aircraft because when I think airplanes, I certainly don't think diesel. Let's go ahead and get started. So first of all, the Diamond 40 TDI, this is not the next generation Diamond. This is basically a classic Diamond 40. It's got all the kind of typical controls that you could expect. We have a really basic GPS on here. Absolutely nothing fancy about it. But this is actually a pretty cool airplane and will get us to our destination. Speaking of destination, we're sitting here right in the Falkland Islands. And we got real world weather, real time of day right now. So obviously we're getting right towards dawn. You can see the sun starting to climb up. And those clouds look nasty. So we're going to have to make the best of what we got here as far as getting ourselves to our destination safely. Let's go ahead and get started. So first things first, with this particular aircraft, it's relatively straightforward. There's a lot of automatic controls on here that make our lives much simpler, which is awesome. So basically, first thing we would do is complete our pre-flight, which we've done. We're going to make sure our emergency fuel valve is set to the normal position, which it is. We're going to double check to make sure our parking brake is in this set position. Again, you can go ahead and go click. And we're going to jam that into the set position. We're going to make sure our power level, notice it's just a single lever, there's no mixture control on this sucker, is set all the way backwards. Next, we're going to make sure our fuel transfer switch is off, which it is. We have a unique system, by the way, as far as fuel transferring. I think you're going to get a kick out of it once we get to that particular point. We're going to make sure avionics is off. We're going to make sure our essential bus, which is this red switch here, we're going to make sure that is shut off. We're going to make sure electrical master is shut off, which is this switch right here, is currently in the off. We're going to make sure all of our light switches are in the off position, which they are. We're going to make sure our piezo heat is off, which it is. We're also going to go ahead and double check and confirm. I'm just looking real quickly and make sure everything's where I expect it to be. ELT is where I expect it to be. That is where I expect it to be. All right, just checking by the floor real quick. All right, looks good. We're going to double check to make sure ECU swap is set to automatic, which is what it's set to. This is, again, engine control unit. We're going to make sure engine master is set to the off position, which it is. We're going to make sure instrument and floodlights are off, which we're going to have to turn those on. It's kind of nasty outside right now. Flap selector should be in the up position, which it is. That's our little switch right here, by the way. We're also going to double check to make sure we're good to start. All right, so first thing we're going to do is click the electric master to the on position. So clicking the thing to the on position, we're just going to take this little key and jerk it once to the right, not to the start, just on. You notice we're going to get about 1,000 different engine warnings here. Again, I love the instrumentation on this aircraft. It's just so difficult. If you get a bunch of warning lights, don't worry about it. Those warning lights will go out once we get everything else kind of going out here. One thing I will do, though, is I'll turn on my instrument panel so you can actually see what I'm doing. I can see again. This is wonderful. We're going to acknowledge the master caution by mangling that button about 10 different times. All right, now what we're going to do is we're going to check the low coolant warnings, which I do not see any warnings for, so I'm not concerned about that at all. We're going to make sure our rudder pedals are just... All right, we're looking pretty good now. Passengers, they've been instructed. We're going to make sure our safety belts are fastened. Close enough. We're going to make sure the rear door is closed. I'm just going to take a look behind me. It looks pretty good to me. We're going to make sure the front canopy is closed, which it is. We're going to go ahead and double check to make sure the fuel quantity is what we expected it to be based on our flight today. So obviously it's a relatively short flight, and we got 14 gallons per side. Unique system with fuel on here. I think you'll get a kick out of it, like I said. Basically, all the fuel gets sucked out of one side of the aircraft, and we have to force fuel into the left side of the aircraft in order to actually get fuel. Kind of weird. Fuel temperature, obviously, for diesel. Fuel temperature matters. The Hobbs meter has been noted. Power lever is set to idle. The strobe light gets turned on. Click. So it's going to let everybody know around us that we're about to get this sucker started and ready to go. All right, starting procedure, super duper simple. Propeller area is going to be clear. Engine master should be set to the on position, which it is. We're going to double check to make sure. I'm just checking everything once real quickly, make sure I didn't miss anything silly here. All right, looks good. We'll make sure the annunciators and instrumentors are checked. We're going to go click the start key to the start position. That's it. That was unscientific. Go ahead and push the throttle forward just a teeny tiny bit here. Whoop. I think it didn't catch properly. Not so much that it didn't catch properly, but you have to turn the engine master system on for it to actually work. Sorry about that. That was one of those things that it was on the other list. It was on the list that I was just reading. Sorry about that. That was a mistake. All right, we're going to get this thing revving up. It's an ECU, so I should say it's a FADEC system, so we don't have to panic too much about the little specific details. All right, oil pressure. We should make sure nothing is damaged, which it isn't. Oil temperature is a little cold, which doesn't surprise me. RPM is supposed to be 890 plus or minus 20 RPM, so I'm actually going to pull the throttle backwards. Looks like it's 880, which is more than close enough. And now it's time to go get everything else started, which is pretty straightforward. So we're going to go ahead and turn this sucker on. The pitot heat, the warning light should come off automatically. Avionics master should be flipped on. We're just going to click this switch right here. Everything is going to go light up and look pretty happy for us. Note that we have a really basic GPS here. This is a GNS430. It works fine. I'm going to go ahead and turn on our transponder by clicking that button down here. We're going to go double check our position lights. We're going to turn those on. It's kind of nasty outside. We're going to go ahead and make sure the flaps go all the way down. They go all the way up. So we're going to click them down 2 notches, and we're going to go ahead and click them up 2 notches. Looks pretty good to me. Ammeters should all be set. Again, we're just checking to make sure everything is what we expect it to be. Our directional gyro looks pretty good. I'm going to reset that real quick. Parking brake, transponder code released. Everything is now set and ready to go. Our aircraft is looking pretty solid. We are ready for our journey here. So takeoff on this aircraft is incredibly simple. Basically, normally what you'd be doing, of course, is you'd run through and you go check to make sure all your engines are working the way you expect them to be behaving and everything along those lines. I'm not going to worry about that too much. Generally, like I said, you want to double check to make sure your fuel temperature is appropriate because, again, we're running a diesel. Actually, it's basically jet fuel, but we're using the diesel cycle in order to go ahead and do it. We just confirm that everything is in the green. Everything is in the green for that. Circuit breakers are good. We want to make sure our flaps are set to the takeoff position, which is going to be exactly 1 notch. We're going to double check our flight controls. I love the center stick. That just feels old school in my mind. Give that a pretty good little wiggle here. Now we have this thing called an ECU test. So now what you normally do is you mash that button, all sorts of fun things would happen, and it would confirm that it works properly. We're going to assume that it worked properly because we got no angry warning lights at any point during that particular time. So normally what you do, like I said, is you get all sorts of things. The prop would cycle itself. It does all sorts of really cool things. We can go double check to make sure the ECU switches to the correct mode when we change to the other mode as well. That looks pretty good to us. And everything else is ready to go. So this aircraft's pretty easy to take off. We're going to rotate at 59 knots, and we're going to be climbing at about 73 knots, which is pretty straightforward. Release the parking brake. I'm going to smoothly apply full throttle. You gotta love the fact that this thing only revs up to 2280, 2300 RPM, I should say. Ooh, boy, it's kind of nasty outside. This is gonna be a fun flight. That looks pretty good. Again, we're gonna be lifting the nose right at the top of the little white line where it says 60 knots. Just amazing to think this thing uses the diesel cycle. All right, aircraft is airborne. My brain instantly wants to reach for the flap lever or the gear lever, but there is no gear lever in this one. What we are going to do is flip up our flaps once we make sure we have enough room kind of covered underneath us. And now we are in the glorious little Falkland Islands on our little journey here. It's about a 16-mile, but we'll probably skip a pretty good chunk of it in the middle. Go ahead and swing our aircraft gently. Again, we're looking for a cruise altitude, I should say climb speed of about 76 knots. It's perfectly welcome to use full power on this. Again, full power can be indicated by this little gauge right here. That 100% simply means we're using 100% of the available power here. So knowing a journey like this in an environment like this, we're probably going to run into some pretty thick clouds on our way up here. It's just amazing. You know, this is a place that never actually got to visit, but just kind of looking around, what happened to the trees? Who took all the trees? They're all gone. All right, so we're going to go ahead and climb up to our cruise altitude, which is going to be fairly low today. We're only going to be going up to 2,000 feet because of the count. We have a pretty significant amount of really nasty clouds. We're just trying to get high enough at this point to go ahead and get coverage above the mountains without going flying directly into those big nasty clouds, which hopefully should clear up before we get too far on our journey today. Go ahead and bring the nose over. Go ahead and bring it back to the start. Center it out. Give myself a little bit of downward trim. Again, the trim on this aircraft is very sensitive, and I think some people will like that. Some people will think it's the worst thing ever. Unfortunately for us, we have no automatic pilot anywhere in sight with this aircraft. So we're stuck flying this entire thing on our own, which is perfectly fine. It's a nice little challenge, and again, we've got all the details we need over on our right screen right there. I'm going to bring the nose over just a tiny bit. Yeah, it's looking pretty good. Again, we've got some pretty serious winds here as well, sweeping these planes. Kind of reminds me of Scotland. Oh no, we don't have the menu option. That is for shame. That is definitely for shame. All right, we're just going to kind of continue climbing up, and I'll meet you guys, well, we're almost about 2,000 feet. I guess I won't meet you. Hold the nose up pretty smoothly. Again, you've got that wonderful FADEC-controlled engine on here, which is going to do 99.9% of the work for you. You just have to put the throttle where you want it to be and kind of worry about everything else as we start to get a little bit higher. So as far as this aircraft goes, is cruising, you're looking for, relatively straightforward, usually between 80 and 70% power, depending exactly what you're trying to achieve for your cruise, or if you're trying to go full speed or anything like that. The nice thing is we don't have to worry about staring at any nasty charts or anything like that. We can just go ahead and just set the power once and kind of be done with it. Of course, as I'm chatting, I completely blew way past our cruise altitude, which was supposed to be 2,000 feet. Sigh on my sigh. I just don't want to go smack into those mountains. Bring our nose down a little bit, and we're going to go ahead and pull the throttle back. Now notice you can get the power exactly where you want it. In this case, I want exactly, we'll do 75% power on the nose. Perfect. And just like that, now the engine holds 75% power. Now that is amazing, because normally you'd have to be looking at charts to determine exactly what speed you need for this, what speed you need for that. You'd have to be going through absolutely everything. Notice there's no propeller pitch control in this aircraft. It's going to be held completely automatic based on whatever settings you basically set it up with. So again, that's going to be a little unique to this aircraft. All right, we're just going to lose that altitude to get back to our correct cruise altitude. Notice we're showing greater than 75% on account of the fact the air got a little bit denser. Well, we don't have a typical kind of a supercharging system on this particular aircraft. There we go, about 2,000 feet. Hold the nose up. I'm going to go ahead and set the power first. We go back to about 75% power. Get ourselves nice and leveled off here. That mountain's looking pretty serious, but we'll deal with that when we get a little bit closer. All right, I'll see you folks at the top of descent. All right, not quite top of descent, but probably a good time to go ahead and interrupt our little flight here. We're enjoying, I love how in the fact that this time of year, it's summer for me, it is basically winter for the rest of the world, the southern hemisphere here. So one thing we do want to think about is our fuel system on board this aircraft. Now our flight's relatively short, so normally what we'd have to do is we'd have to sit there and actually manually rebalance the fuel inside the aircraft. Now that sounds a little different, because normally you pick left, you pick right. This aircraft instead has a fuel transfer switch. So what this does is it sucks fuel out of one side and it jams it into the other side of the aircraft. Now, what makes this so unique is in the regular Diamond, this is how we basically fill that side of the airplane. In this aircraft, it actually has the ability to draw fuel from both fuel tanks automatically. Like you can see right now, we're sucking pretty much an even amount of fuel. But if we had a fuel imbalance during our flight, what we could actually do is we could flick on this switch to suck fuel out of the right side of the aircraft and pump it into the left side, which again, it's a little unique and it's a little different than the regular Diamond system. You know, there's no cross-feed button. It's just a straight-up pump that sends the fuel from one side to the other, like I was saying. All right, we're about 9.4 nautical miles away from our destination. It's time to start thinking about descending with this aircraft. Again, because we're a pretty powerful aircraft with a nice FADEC on board, it's going to do all the hard work for us. We just have to select the speed we want to go ahead and descend at and let everything else kind of worry about. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the throttle back until we get to about 60% power. I'm going to gently push the nose forward till we get about 500 feet per minute. It's just a teeny tiny push here. Right about there should do it. And now we're just going to slowly make our way down to our destination airport, which you can see right off our nose there at about 12 o'clock. So one thing I want to do on my way down is I want to go ahead and double check to see what the wind is going to be on the Mount Pleasant. Let's go ahead and call up the ATIS and find out what's going on here. Again, this is real world weather this morning. Let's see, wind 66 at 10, which means we're going to be landing, oh boy. Now that's what we call a crosswind. So basically, taking a look at our runway, if you want to look out kind of directly out of our nose here, if we try to land this aircraft basically straight on, you're going to have a wind basically coming out of this direction. So this is one of those nasty positions where you really, really don't want to be. But the good news for us is there should be a crosswind runway, which will be a little bit better aligned with the actual wind that we're going to be interested in. It's just very, very difficult to see at this distance. Yeah, that's about, we'll take that one. We're going to go actually do a straight-in approach today to keep it nice and simple for ourselves. So I'm going to go ahead and take ourselves to the side. Again, we're about 60% power. I'm going to back the throttle about just a tiny bit more. Hold that 500 feet per minute. Again, in the real world, the less feet per minute down you do, the less damage you do to everybody's ears. Landing this aircraft is an absolute snap. For those of you who land the 172 a lot, you're probably very familiar with landing this aircraft. Basically, what we're going to do is we're going to approach at a speed of less than 108, which obviously we're going a little quick here, and we're going to go ahead and get into the pattern and do about 90 knots. 90 knots is going to get us our takeoff flaps as well as our landing light. When we're coming down for landing, we're looking for about 71 knots in the initial descent, and we're looking for 67 knots on the final part of our descent there. So we're just going to kind of cruise on down here. Unfortunately, we don't have any fancy radar altimeters or anything like that on this aircraft. But like I said, the wind is basically blasting us right in the face, so it should be a pretty straightforward landing here. Again, this is Mount Pleasant, and we're here in the Falklands. I love the frame rate out here, though. There's no fancy terrain or no fancy buildings or anything, so everything's like 140 frames per second. This is great. And we're just going to bring ourselves down a little bit lower here. I'm going to go double check my altitudes and everything along those lines to make sure I didn't do anything incredibly silly here. Let's see, 206 feet, so our pattern altitude is 1,200 feet. Obviously, we're going to be coming in with a modified pattern. I'm going to go ahead and back the throttle down to about 40% or so. Again, the engine's doing all the hard work for us. It's going to maintain the correct RPM. And I'm going to back it down even further to about 25%. With aircraft like this, you always want to do any power changes as smoothly as possible. All right, there's our 109 knots. We're going to get a little bit slow. I'm actually going to level the aircraft off for just a moment. Back the throttle a couple more notches. Trying to get inside of our nice little safe zone. Going to get right into the white region there. We're going to go ahead and deploy our first notch of flaps. Gears are already down. All right, we're going to go ahead and gently turn. We'll turn on the tower so you don't have to listen to ATIS anymore there. And we're going to approach, like I said, you're looking for an airspeed of right around 71 knots for the initial approach, and then you want to be doing about 67 knots over the fence, so to speak. All right, taking a look at the end of the runway there. Again, we're getting a heck of a crosswind, or a heck of a face wind. What's a face wind? Heck of a headwind. There we go, giggity. Coming directly at us, which is, of course, going to slow our landing down significantly, which it happens, but it's nothing too bad. All right, we're looking pretty good. We got 2 whites, 2 reds. And normally with aircraft like this, we can do 3 reds and 1 white, and don't have to panic too much. Otherwise, we end up sucking down a lot more runway than we really want to use. I'm going to go ahead and bring in my last notch of flaps now that I'm safely within the white region. Aircraft's going to pitch up ever so slightly, and you can see everything is looking pretty good there. Now to go begin our landing checks, we're going to confirm that our landing light is on the on position. We're going to do our gumfels, gas, undercarriage, mixture, propeller, flaps, lights, speed. A lot of people do gumps and just use the word speed instead of switch, or switch instead of speed. I don't know. I do what my flight instructor told me years ago. There we go. 3 reds and 1 white is going to be ideal for us because, again, we're not airliners. We don't need 50 feet off the end of the runway when we're approaching. And we'll go ahead and manipulate the throttle to get us going about, like I said, around 71 knots is kind of the sweet speed here. Myself a little bit of a nose-up trim. And just a tiny bit more power here. We don't want to do anything too serious here. This is about 70 knots. We're getting just a tiny bit slow. Bring in some power, using about 50% power, as you can see down below. Whoop. Looking pretty good. That headwind is really strong, but it's also slightly coming from that direction, so it's kind of pushing us off course here. I'm going to go ahead and bring my wing down a little bit. And I'm going to go ahead and use my rudder to straighten myself out. We'll use the wing low method for the crosswind. Getting ourselves a little bit of extra altitude here. I'm going to bring the nose down a little more. There we go. All right, so I've got my right rudder in, and I've got my left aileron down to the left there. Getting a little fast. Again, that's a gigantic runway for an airplane this small. Using my rudder to keep the nose where it needs to be, and I'm using my aileron to control how much I'm drifting across the runway here. All right, looks pretty good. And that wind it's a little bumpy. It's a little bit better of an altitude. All right, we're going to start slowing down to our final approach speed, which is going to be about 67 knots. Try not to do this dramatically. When you do it dramatically, it tends to have a little bit of a wing drop action, which is the last thing we want to do. All right, there's our 67 knots. We're going to bring the throttle back in. Big old number runway 10. I notice there's a lot of snow on the runway, so we're going to be very easy on the brakes. As a matter of fact, we use as much aero braking as we can. This aircraft is great because it basically glides once you get down to the correct altitude. A little bit of more right foot. We're going to go ahead and gently pull the throttle all the way down to 0. And we're just going to hold the aircraft level about 6 inches off the ground. And when the plane starts to sink, we're simply going to bring the nose up just a tiny bit. And we float just a little bit. Again, we have a really strong wind there. And we are down. Nice. All right, no aggressive braking action. Looks like the ground's still pretty slippery, but obviously the truck has been by already to make our lives a little bit simpler. All right, hold that brake. Not bad. All right, so this concludes the video as far as the Diamond TDI. Just like a regular Diamond, apparently it's just a little bit better on the gas than the traditional Diamond is. And again, we're in the lovely Falklands. Enjoy.